En dan gaan we beginnen met de volgende spreker, Mr. Peter Ballerstedt. Die een verhaal gaat vertellen over dieren, over vee, over koeien. En hoe je met die koeien jezelf heel gezond houdt. Mr. Peter Ballerstedt, I give you the word.
Attentie!
Dames, ook even stil.
Good afternoon. It's a pleasure to be here. What an honor and what a hard job to follow Dr. Frank Mitloehner. I'll try not to stumble too badly. The great message that we all need to learn, we need to internalize, we need to get better at telling, is that what we do is part of the solution. There can be no sustainable food system without animal agriculture. There can be no public health without animal source food. Thank you. I'll take any questions that you have at this time. More. Okay. So there are lots of topics. I have this problem that I always try to put too many slides in. So I did it again, but we're going to skip through them and you're going to get them all, and you can please contact me. We'll try to get them translated. We'll get them distributed. The information is available and it's vital. But the problem here is that too many people have posed animal agriculture as the problem. Instead of, it's the scapegoat. Does that translate? Okay. That animal agriculture is the scapegoat for these problems rather than being part of the solution. So we could talk about land use. It would be better if we just grow soybeans everywhere that we graze animals. Well, that's nonsense, but they don't understand that that's nonsense. It's feed versus food. They don't understand that there is no competition between livestock and human beings for the resources, right? They don't understand that the products we get from livestock are much more valuable than the feed that we put into them. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it. They have a misunderstanding of animal welfare. They too often confuse it with animal rights. Not the same. Any responsible person in animal agriculture is concerned about animal welfare. If for no other reason, profit. I understand the Dutch are good at business. Is that true? Okay. I mentioned the nutritive values. I'm going to hammer on the supposed health risks. And then we've already heard a wonderful conversation about emissions, but I want to apply it to the food. We need to take it another step in the conversation. So we're going to try to go through this. Where do I need to push this to make it work? There. Okay. So as I just mentioned to someone during the break, the opponents seemingly have a great argument. And I use the analogy of a thick rope, right? It looks really strong. What we have to learn how to do is unbraid that rope and test each strand. And when we learn how to test each of those strands objectively, they fail scientifically. Then our job is to figure out how to communicate that in a way that can be heard. Yes? Y'all haven't had a meal yet, so you shouldn't be sleepy. Just kidding. Okay. What is going on? Why is this not working? Okay, so my role in life is to try to build bridges between silos of expertise. And I get to stand in front of several hundred physicians and nutritionists and clinicians, and I just did it last weekend. and I get to tell them things like, this is a ruminant, right? Because they don't know. I don't know about here in the Netherlands. I'm sure it's much better training than in the US. Hello? But in the US, physicians get next to nothing in terms of training in nutrition. Anybody here got an idea about nutrition's value in herd health? Right? Do you try to overcome nutrition problems with antibiotics or with other? No, obviously. Herd health begins with nutrition. Why is it different with human beings? So I'm trying to connect communities because I think that we'll find natural allies. This idea that consumers and producers alike care about things in common, right? Animal welfare, environmental stewardship, food safety, nutrition, taste, everybody cares about that. Now, we may understand them differently because of our experience, right? If you live this every day and you grew up in this every day, your understanding is going to be different from somebody who grew up in the city, right? And all they've heard is our special friends, as it was said. Okay, so this is a point of commonality. Let's help each other understand our perspectives. Whoop, back. Can you run the slides from where you are? Can you go back one? Thank you. So I am a proponent of ruminant animal agriculture. I try to convince people that true health food comes from ruminants. Can I get an amen? But where did health food come from? That idea. We can get into that later. Okay. Next, please. But I'm ecumenical. I'm broad-minded. All animal source food is good for me. How about you? Yeah. Excellent. Next, please. So I really like this quote. I don't want to tell anybody what they should eat, right? I'm not interested in that. I'd prefer that you don't try to tell me, but, you know, at least I will set a good example. Okay, but you need to have information if you're going to make decisions. And I'm pretty sure that most people don't have the necessary information to make a truly informed decision. So our job is to make up for the public policy, the public educators who have been derelict in their responsibilities. Next, please. So let's find a point of common ground. Can we agree on these 2 points? That we should focus on obtaining adequate essential nutrition and attaining or restoring or maintaining metabolic health. And then make the appropriate choices based on personal preferences, based on personal circumstances, based on individual responses. You know, we're not all the same. You may have noticed this. Human beings have a variety of responses. Why should one size fit all? Does that work in clothing? Why should it work in diet? Okay. Now, if you can't agree on those 2 points, if somebody you're talking to doesn't agree on those 2 points, I would suggest come back later. They're not interested in a sincere conversation. How could you disagree with that? You've got some other agenda going on. Okay, so, whoops, sorry, back. My problem. You are entitled to your opinion, but you're not entitled to your own facts. Yes? So let's get a few facts out as we go through this, please. Okay, one more shot. I'm sorry. Sometimes I can't resist making fun or poking or whatever. So it says, so you want to be a vegan like us? Sorry, kid, you need more guts. Biology is not fair. We don't have the digestive system to get sufficient energy, sufficient nutrition from a plant-only diet. It is physiologically impossible. Fortunately, we have ruminants that can turn something nasty like kale into something wonderful like heavy cream for our strawberries, or T-bone steak for before the strawberries, or maybe after the strawberry. Oh, next, please. And ruminants have all these wonderful properties. And I could go on and on and on about how they're a gift from God, as a friend of mine said. But this one in particular has a skill that I'd really like to see imported into various countries. This Haryana cow, which is a lie detector, and apparently goes quite crazy, which I don't really know what that means, but I'd like to see it, if someone lies in its presence. I'd like to see that. Could we take some and never mind? Okay, so if an honest man is shown to be in error, he either ceases to be in error or he ceases to be honest. Next, please. The notion that raising livestock and consuming animal source food is against sustainable development is just wrong. And it looks very different if you're in low and middle income countries looking at the West than if you're in an affluent country where you have reasonable access to food that's reliably at the market, that's safe to consume, that you have a world of choices. Looks very different. But we only live in one world. And what we do here ripples out into the rest of the world. And if we don't understand what that reality looks like, we could end up hurting them. By the way, all of my references are captured. I've distributed them. I'm happy to share. That's my role. Next, please. So we have challenges ahead of us. Next, please. So 29 years, 2050. These are things that people have been saying for some time. Next, please. So the world population will reach 9 billion. Next, please. We'll have to double food production. Next, please. That will be an increase in demand of approximately 2/3 for animal source protein. I'm going to argue that that's a dramatic underestimation, but this is what was published, so I have the sources. It must come from virtually the same land area as today. Not everyone is as clever as the Dutch have been at creating arable land out of seabed. That's remarkable. Not everybody can do that. And you really can't do a lot of that, can you? Okay, next, please. And we're seeing a dramatic loss of arable topsoil. We're degrading that most precious resource globally. Next, please. And 70% of humanity will live in urban areas by 2050. Think about that. This is globally. And next, please. And here's one. We're going to have to double electrical generating capacity to meet the demands of people in low and middle income countries going forward. Right? They're going to get the power they need. Their government is going to make sure of it. And if the choice is between no power and dirty power, which one do you think they're going to pick? They're going to go dirty all the time. So as we're thinking about what we can do here, this is part of the background in which we will do it. Next, please. So livestock foods are important for development. Next, please. Feeding developing countries out of poverty via animal source foods. I like that story. Anybody else? Oh, I've lost you already. Okay, next, please. So nitrogen's been a topic. Nitrogen gas makes up 80% of the Earth's surface atmosphere. Nitrogen is the only nutrient that is often the nutrient that limits primary production. And you know, it has to be converted in order to be made into the biomolecules that we must have. All right, these are not optionals. Okay, next please. And lots of things can happen to nitrogen, and we could be spending time on it. Don't want to get too much into this, but just understand it's a complex and often biological process. That there are microorganisms involved in this, but next please. Just like you saw with methane, there's a global budget when it comes to nitrous oxide. So there's sources and sinks, and there are also estimates. When you look at these, you need to understand that there's some bars, you know, plus or minus involved with all this. Okay, next please. And don't use a global average, or don't allow a global average figure to be used to estimate your industry's impact. It's not accurate. It's not fair. And remember that what you do in this country can somewhat be offset from surrounding countries. And what good does it do if you transport your food production to another country where they do it less efficiently? You've just increased the burden. Next, please. This may take too long to explain. There's some data showing what the global emissions are and what percentage of those in each country are coming from manure application. I don't know if you can see that Netherlands next to New Zealand, in between New Zealand and Ireland, is on this graph. Not a lot compared to some other countries, but we're talking about a low level overall. The blue line is the level. And so I'm afraid that U.S. is the gorilla in this, and we may need to do penance later. Next, please. But when we use fertilizer, artificial, organic, manure, just get it right. We need to think about what we call the 4 R's. This is something in fertilizer management education in the U.S. Right source, right rate, right time, right place. Right, so the first slide that I showed talking about nitrogen had some real green bands, right, on it. Yeah, they didn't get the place right, which probably means that they didn't get the rate right in those bands because they were counting on spreading it evenly across the whole field. So there's lots of things that we can do to do better, and we have to. We understand that. We're not shirking our responsibility. But again, let's make sure it's a fair conversation, yes? So we're talking about producing food. So let's talk about comparing fairly animal versus plant source foods. So when you look at various studies, you can see that they'll compare this on, next please. Back. Thank you. Sometimes they'll compare it on what we call isocaloric, equal calorie basis. So I could get 100 calories from corn, and I could compare that to 100 calories from beef. Okay? Well, that's not fair. If I feed 100 calories of carbohydrate, which would be from the corn, plant source foods are sugar or starch, yes? Group participation is really appreciated. Thank you. I know some people here speak English. I know the translation. How about we have a round of applause for the translators? I always love having my talks transcribed to see what somebody thought I was talking about. So if I feed 100 calories worth of sugar and starch to a human being, it doesn't have the same metabolic effect as if I fed 100 calories of butter fat to someone. So why do we compare them as if they're equal? It's not fair. Similarly, if I look at protein, and that's a whole nother story we could talk about, but if I could have equal amounts of protein from plants and animal source foods, they're not going to have the same metabolic effect either. So why do we compare them as if they are? Here's something that begins to take us down a rabbit hole, and I'm happy to talk about it through the rest of the day. But the amount of vitamins individuals need is not a fixed amount. The amount of these vitamins that you need is influenced by the nature of your diet. Briefly, the more carbohydrate in your diet, the more vitamin C you need. That's interesting. And if before anybody starts talking to me about how you need vitamin C to prevent scurvy, and there's no vitamin C in meat, I've heard this before, just understand that for a century or so, we've understood that fresh meat cures scurvy. That's kind of awkward. There's no vitamin C in meat, and yet we think that scurvy is an absence of vitamin C, but when I feed fresh meat, I cure scurvy. Okay, welcome to my world. Next, please. And animal source foods are superior nutrition for feeding human beings. Next, please. They're sole sources of several nutrients. They're most available forms of others. Next, please. They're superior in terms of nutrients that we could get from plants, but they're in a better ratio. They're better available. Next, please. They're the only source of some others, as I said before. Next, please. And there's some unique properties, again, that are only available and we really don't understand them fully. They haven't been incorporated in our nutritional guidelines yet. Next, please. Here's the take-home point. We have not yet incorporated the nutritional value of plant versus animal protein when we look at environmental impacts. Next, please. And when we do, we begin to see some remarkable things. This is a paper that came out 2 months ago or so. Again, all the references are posted. You can see them. What they did is they looked across 200 and some odd countries and territories, and these are about 100 and some of them. And they looked at the daily average protein requirement and supply. The green bar on the bottom is from plants. The peach color is on the top is from animal source foods. Now, what many in the food policy and nutrition communities do is they look at that total and they say, well, we're above the requirement. Good to go. Oh, there's a couple problems. That's crude protein. How many people here are dairymen or beefmen? How many people here are swine producers? Okay, swine producers, do you balance your ration on crude protein or on amino acids? Amino acids. So which do you think is closer to a human being, a cow or a pig? Pig. In fact, a pig is a good model for human nutrition, and we could go into that. So for almost half a century, swine producers have been more knowledgeable about protein nutrition than human nutritionists. That's interesting. Okay, so this is crude protein. Crude protein is total nitrogen percent times 6.25, right? It's not protein. It's not amino acids. Yes? Okay. Now, we're going to correct for this. Next slide. We've corrected it now for protein digestibility. Because again, equal amounts of protein from plants and animals are not equally digestible. So why should we compare them environmentally as if they are? Okay, and see what's happened now. Only those few on the far side of that graph are still above that minimum requirement. That's a whole nother story. They label it requirement. What they don't tell you is that's a minimum. It's not a target, it's a minimum. Yeah, that's awkward. Okay, so we've corrected for digestibility. Next, please. We now correct it for utilizability. And I'll get into this, but the take-home message here now is that none of those 103 countries are meeting their protein minimum values. Okay, next, please. And when we then begin to correct for the essential amino acids that we must have and look at those instead of crude protein, it shifts the conversation. This just happens to be greenhouse gases. They also looked at land use. They looked at fresh water. I already knew I had too many, so I cut those out. They're available in the paper. But you see on the one closest to me, that's looking at tons of CO2 equivalent per ton of protein, crude protein. Okay? And wheat is closest to me, and milk is the furthest one in this left panel. Now go to the next panel. No, stay on this slide. Sorry. And you see that they've now changed this to greenhouse gas emissions, CO2 equivalent per kilogram of lysine. And look what's happened to the difference between wheat and milk. It begins to go away. Next slide, please. But nobody sits down to a plate of protein. We have meat, or we have cheese. We have food. And food has macronutrients in it, has micronutrients in it. You don't sit down and, never mind. Okay, when we begin to look at the other nutrients we get, it changes it again. The top is the greenhouse gas emissions in kilograms of CO2 equivalent for what you'd have to eat in order to get a third of your daily requirements of zinc, iron, calcium, folate, vitamin A, and B12. The one at the top is refined grains. And you have to come down 4 slots to get to beef. And you have to come down a bit more to get fresh milk. And I don't know what the difference between fresh milk and cow milk is, but I didn't publish the paper. Liver is at the very bottom in terms of nutrients per kilogram of emissions. Next slide, please. And please keep this one in mind. Dr. Mitloehner just talked to you about this. Everything I just showed you was the old, inaccurate estimation. So cut those values for ruminant animal products or animal source foods by that 3 value. And the other thing to put in this, and Dr. Mitloehner, surely maybe I wasn't paying attention, but that overestimation for biogenic methane flips when we start talking about fossil methane in the quote. They talk about this new source of methane underestimating its impact by that 3 to 4. So now we start to stretch the gap here. Does that make sense? I've lost you, and I really apologize. Yeah? With me? Okay. Thank you. Next, please. So when we consider both quality and quantity, our animals are multiplying. They're increasing the food supply, and they're improving its quality. This is a different reality than the narrative frequently says, at least by my perception. Next, please. In the U.S., the amount of human edible lysine that we feed to our typical commercial steers, they yield 240% more. Deal, right? I'd rather eat the tofu, T-bone. Wow, Freudian slip. I'd rather eat the T-bone than the tofu. Great line, I just stepped on it. Next, please. So when it comes to the consumption of animal source foods, is there such a thing as too little animal source food in the human diet? To hear some people, they would deny that there is such a thing. I'm here to tell you that there very much is such a thing. Next, please. Our children, next please. Worldwide, close to 1 billion people are undernourished. That is an underestimation. Next please. This protein energy malnutrition, most lethal form of malnutrition, and children are its most visible victims. Next please. Globally, under 5 years old, next please. Over half are deficient in micronutrients. This is children globally. Today, 2021. This is a shame. This is a scandal. We can do better. Nearly 1/4 of children globally are stunted. Next, please. 7% are wasted. That doesn't have, never mind. Next, please. 6% are obese. Okay, at the same time that we're seeing that, 1/3 of women of childbearing age globally are anemic. Vitamin B12 deficiency is global, even in high-income countries. It's very typical to see these deficiencies in grain-based rations for humans. I'm sorry, diets. We can't talk about rations. Next, please. First 1,000 days are critical in human life and development. Next, please. Over 1/3 of women. I just said that. Next, please. Yeah, just said that. Next, please. Only 40% of infants 6 months or under are exclusively breastfed globally. That's the recommendation is for them to be breastfed. So this is a problem. Next, please. And it gets really weird when you start reading these documents. This is from WHO. Animal source foods are the best sources of high quality nutrients for children from 6 to 13 months of age. Okay? But you got to read down into the footnotes to see their translation from high quality to animal source foods. It's like they can't say it. So let's say it for them. Animal source foods for children who have been weaned. Yes? Next slide, please. But only 59% of children in that age group globally are fed eggs. Sorry, 59% are not fed eggs, dairy, fish, or meat. Again, too little. Next, please. This is just evidence of what happens when human beings don't get enough meat. This is now not eggs, dairy, seafood. This is just meat of various kinds. And you can see the relationship between stunting and meat consumption on a per capita basis for these countries. Next, please. And this is where Eat Lancet wants us to be. How many people have heard of Eat Lancet? Okay, this was their global dietary recommendation. Down there in that high stunting rate intake. Yeah, I don't think so. Next, please. But it's not just this. If we have aflatoxin in the grains or nuts or pulses that are recommended, that can lead to stunting too. And we go to low and middle income countries where they don't have the quality control that we do on our crop production. They don't have the storage that we do in the high income countries. So we have people telling others throughout the world that they need to be exposing themselves more to this. We need to get better at communicating. Next, please. We have studies showing what happens when we supplement the diets of school children with minimal amounts of animal source food. We see an increase in their scholastic performance and their social interactions. So clearly what they were getting wasn't enough. So there is such a thing as too little. Next, please. And when you get to be an old fart like me, we need even more high quality food in our diet. Yes? Women, if you're worried about your bone health or you know others, you know that bones without protein is called chalk. Next, please. Tough room. Next, please. Just click down till you get to the last one on this, if you would, please. Thank you very much. How about for the tech support? Can we get a... I just learned about this the week before last, attending a Meat Science Society meeting. And so we have these bridges, these silos of information that we have to get better at communicating between the silos, the bridge building again. But this idea that it's deficiencies of these indispensable amino acids that's the cause of many conditions that we're seeing throughout the high-income countries as well as the low. Please remember that undernutrition is not synonymous with a caloric deficit. You can be overfed but undernourished. Yes? Okay, subclinical kwashiorkor. This is it. Kwashiorkor, I've been told, is an African word, and it basically gets translated as the sickness that comes when the new baby arrives. So the last child is weaned, and that source of essential nutrition is now removed from its diet, and it goes on to a grain-based diet. And then we see the wasting with the edema, the swollen belly, the sort of typical kwashiorkor protein deficiencies. Next, please. And go ahead and click down to the last, I think there's 3 on this one. So, meat scientists looked through the literature and found 10 studies where they had fed swine deficient and sufficient levels of lysine. Lysine is globally a limiting amino acid. And what he found when he looked across the data was more subcutaneous fat, much more fat in the muscle, and 8% smaller loin muscle. Next slide, please. So that degree in marbling difference is between a 2 for sufficient and 5 for deficient. And I had a surgeon come up to me and tell me later that that's what he's seeing in his human patients. And he's now wondering if it isn't lysine deficiency. Interesting. So you don't know what we'll learn when we can speak amongst ourselves. Next, please. So when it comes to the consumption of animal source food, there is such a thing as too little. Next, please. Is there really such a thing as too much? Where does that come from? But lots of people say it, right? Next, please. Claims about the health dangers of red meat are not only improbable in the light of our evolutionary history, they are far from being supported by robust scientific evidence. We didn't evolve to eat meat, we evolved because we ate meat. And bone marrow, and brain. Fascinating story, don't have time. Glad to bore you later with it. I think I'm boring you enough right now. Next, please. So let's review, shall we? Eating red meat won't make you fat, clog your arteries, give you diabetes, cause cancer, kill your kidneys, acidify your blood, melt your bones. Good luck. But how many people have heard any of this? Thank you. Thank you. Thank you very much. But how many people have heard some of this? Yeah? It won't make you morally weak. Now, you might be morally weak, but it won't be because you eat red meat. Don't blame the meat. Next, please. Okay, and it won't deprive others of food. It doesn't drive climate change. We just heard about this. Is it part of it? Yes, but it's not the gorilla. And it won't destroy the planet. Lots of good stories we can tell. Next, please. Now, where some of this might be coming at us from is our physicians and our dietitians. So Credit Suisse did this survey, I believe, yes, 2015. And globally, 92% of the respondents believe that fat consumption could lead to cardiovascular disease. 87% believe that fat consumption could lead to obesity. 83% of doctors believe that butter was worse than margarine. Idiots. Next, 66% of doctors believe vegetable oils are beneficial for health. And 54% of doctors and 40% of nutritionists thought that eating cholesterol-rich foods raised blood cholesterol. Every single one of these is wrong. Next, please. Oh, back one. So there is a functional discipline, scientific discipline within nutrition. It's called animal nutrition. And I visited with Dr. Mitloehner just a little over a week ago. And he showed me this equipment where he can determine on an individual animal basis the amount that an animal eats at what time in the day. So we can know exactly what they eat. Well, human nutrition doesn't do that. Mostly because they can't. It's legitimate reasons, right? You can't do some things with humans that you can do in a laboratory with animals. And yes, we have ethical constraints on what we can do with animals. That's true. But we raise it to a whole nother level when we go to human beings. Next, please. Meanwhile, human nutrition is based on something called nutritional epidemiology of chronic disease. Next, please. It's essentially mythology. This was the author's comment. But I'll use it because it's true. It's false. It's a story. It's myth. Next, please. It's based on questionnaires. So in Dr. Mitloehner's research, they don't ask the cow how much they ate. They measure what the cow eats. Because cows lie, you know that, right? They underestimate all the time. It's a terrible thing. Again, if you're not measuring anything, you don't have real data. And here's the tell on this. When you take the results from nutritional epidemiology studies and you try to craft them into a clinical trial, those ideas have failed 80% of the time they're tried. Now that's such a stark statistic. If it was just random chance, you'd expect 50-50. To be 80% wrong is a bias. Next, please. Well, here she is. Here's the bias. There are people throughout the human nutrition community that are heavily biased to plant-biased nutrition, is what I call it, plant-based. Vegan, call it whatever you want to. Next, please. And some of them are quite proud of it. This is a paper published by a member of the Seventh-day Adventist Church. And if you don't know why that's important, talk to me later. Okay, but they're quite proud of the impact that they've had. They advocate a vegetarian diet. And they've been at this since the early 20th century. Next, please. So here's my statement. The preponderance of high-quality evidence from all scientific disciplines strongly suggests that the most likely harm associated with animal source food consumption is from not consuming enough. And shouldn't that be part of the conversation about environmental impacts? If this food is essential, okay, let's do better. Let's figure out how to do this. Brazil has 3 times the number of cattle that the US does, but they produce less beef. How can we lower their footprint? Improve their beef production systems. However, that has to happen. Okay, next, please. So I've talked to, there's a talk on YouTube called When is Protein Not Protein? We've already talked about that, but watch the video. Next, please. But here's where it ties back into environmental issues. This is actually from swine nutrition. But again, swine are a good model for human beings. In this case, the short stave of this barrel is lysine. Okay? So the value depends on the first limiting amino acid. The first limiting amino acid determines how much of the other amino acids can be absorbed and utilized. Those that can't be are then oxidized and the nitrogen is excreted. And so we have swine producers in the United States, and I'm sure here as well, worried about balancing amino acids in part to lower the nitrogen load in the manure. Okay, next. Phytate, again, from swine and poultry. Click through the text, please. Thank you. And thanks again. Really appreciate it. Phosphorus, phytate is the major storage form of phosphorus in most grains and pulses and other recommended foods. But 60 to 80% of the, it's not bioavailable. I'm sorry, I'm cutting to the chase. We can't utilize that phosphorus. Neither can the swine. And so that's why they've developed low phytate cereals to feed to poultry and swine to lower the environmental impact of those feeding operations, because less phosphorus is then voided in the feces. Next, please. And this idea of reintegrating livestock into cropping systems, click through the text, please. Basically, it's been demonstrated that they can get more food from the same area with the same or lower inputs. So it's a win-win-win. Next, please. Okay, so I'm going to get snarky a little bit. The medical industry has an environmental footprint. We don't really know. There are estimates. In this case, this one paper talked about 10% of U.S. greenhouse gas emissions coming from the healthcare industry. All of agriculture is somewhere around 9%, correct? The animal agriculture is about 4% and beef is about 2%. Both professions wear white coats. Which one produces more greenhouse gases? And here's, click next, please. So here's a message that we can help people understand, that their health, thank you, has an environmental footprint. And perhaps the most practical thing we can all do is improve our health. We have no idea how that ripples out into our communities, our families, at work. But this is a message that I think could reach everyone. And that what you're doing in producing animal source foods is critical to this. Next, please. So now I'm going to get personal. And I know I'm in the Netherlands where your health is much better than in the United States. Know this, so please don't be offended. But in the United States, only 12% of adult Americans enjoy optimal metabolic health. And if you think just because you have normal weight, you have optimal metabolic health, weight has always been known to be a bad marker for individual health. But it's what we use. Okay, next slide, please. So you do not have optimal metabolic health if one of these following conditions is true. You only need one. You have abdominal obesity, and note there are different figures for men and women. Sorry, sisters, biology is not fair. Serum triglycerides are elevated. HDL cholesterol is depressed, and again, there are different targets for men and women. Blood pressure is elevated, fasting blood glucose is elevated, or you're taking medications for any one of those. If that's true for you, then you do not have optimal metabolic health per these people. Okay? Here's the great message that I'm here to give you is those conditions can be reversed and documented so in the literature. It's not even an argument anymore, by eating more animal source food and less carbohydrate, less high sugar, less, so idea, yes, good? Okay. Next slide, please. And so there is this idea that all of these chronic conditions that we're faced in the United States, and I suspect here too, come from a common soil. And that common soil is hyperinsulinemia and insulin resistance. chronically elevated levels of insulin, and insulin resistance. There's great books available. I'm happy to share information. There are people that we can direct you to. But again, a good message for those people who are our customers or our neighbors or our fellow citizens. Next, please. Oh, by the way, by the time you get to be a politician, you're kind of upper middle age probably at some level. And yeah, this stuff starts to hit them, right? So if you have a personal relationship with them and you find out that, hey, they're type 2 diabetic or whatever, you might slip them a little idea that, there is such a thing as drug-free remission from type 2 diabetes. Every 30 seconds, someone in the world loses a lower leg due to diabetes. And when that process begins for people, even in the United States, their prognosis is worse than many cancers following diagnosis. Next. So I'm not that kind of doctor, though. I'm not a medical doctor. I'm not a human nutritionist, so I don't want to get in trouble. Whoops, too late. But I do say that you should take your daily meds. Next, please. And that stands for meat, eggs, dairy, seafood. Adjust as you see fit, right? Not everybody wants to eat red meat, and I'm fine with that. Just make sure that, the EDS is still there. Next, please. So, one more thing. A steak a day will keep the doctor away. Next, please. Thank you for your attention and your patience. Thank you for the opportunity to come here. Thank you for what you're doing. Next, please. One more. Next. This is contact information, social media accounts. Please feel free. Contact me. I mentioned before, I'm happy to have material translated. We need to get this message out. And yeah, thank you again for the opportunity.
Mr. Ballerstedt, Dr. Ballerstedt, thank you very much. And the message, a steak a day keeps the doctor away. Yeah, that's super. So, nog een applaus voor Dr. Pieter Ballerstedt. En in feite hebben we nu heel veel informatie gekregen en er zullen ook vast vragen zijn. Wie wil de eerste vraag stellen?
Oh?
Ja.
Waarom maakt u geen onderscheid tussen industrieel voedsel en natuurlijk voedsel? De boeren hebben een natuurlijk voedsel, vlees, melk, eieren, groenten, fruit, mineralen, enzymen, vitamine, gezondheid. En de industrie die heeft suikers, koolhydraten, smaakversterkers, vegan en kweekvlees. En ziek worden. Gooi die onderscheid ertussen.
Thank you for that. Point taken. My response would start with that processed animal source foods and processed plant source foods are very different. And we shouldn't talk about them as if they're equivalent. Bacon, some people call a processed food. I call it a gift. I take your point, though. And certainly there was just a study released in the United States that said that 60% of the calories in our children's diet are coming from what they called ultra-processed foods. Now, what they didn't consider ultra-processed foods were pasta, white rice, bread. By the time you include those, you're jacking up close to 90%. So absolutely, that stuff needs to be replaced with whole foods. Absolutely.
Iemand meer vragen?
Ja, helemaal achterin. Helemaal achterin.
We're going to give you your steps today, Mark.
Ja.
What's your take on lab-grown meat? Is it equivalent in nutrients, or can a human take that in as well?
Well, what kind of meat?
Lab-grown. It's culture from a cell and then grown.
Well, so what are they culturing? When they haven't produced meat that has the fat, the collagen, and the other components of muscle, I'm suspicious. Number two, people who work in tissue culture labs tell me that they must use a lot of antibiotics to keep those solutions sterile. Number three is they also tell me that they must use a lot of hormones to trigger the development that they need. So, you know, we're getting close to the ain't no but hell no as far as I'm concerned. And the short version is I just mentioned margarine. Right? Once upon a time they thought margarine was a substitute for butter, and now we know that we killed people with margarine. Up right here. Whoop. You were almost there. Let's get them going back and forth. Back and forth.
Thank you. What happens with the people when they only get 14 grams of meat? What they say in Australia is going to happen.
Yeah. So I think, now Dr. Mitloehner will help me. I believe that they have admitted, and I have the reference, that their diet would cause malnutrition, so they're dependent on supplements in various areas. But I believe they also made a remarkable admission to you in correspondence. Could you give Dr. Mitloehner the microphone?
So, okay, so this so-called Eat Lancet diet is one that was promoted as being the new planetary diet, something everybody in the world should eat to improve personal health and planet health. So I contacted the science director of Eat Lancet and I asked, I read the report and I looked at all the data and I cannot figure out why your data is better for the planet. I don't think it is. Can you explain to me why you're saying that? And then he wrote me an email, so I have it in writing. He said, our diet was solely based on health recommendations. It's not the diet to keep us from climate change. And it's not the diet to save the planet. And I just could not believe it, because I had heard, like most other people in the world who had read Eat Lancet, that they said that this plant-based diet is a better diet for the planet. In personal communication, they said, this was never our goal, that is not what our diet does.
So it's not better for the planet, it's not better for the people. Other than that, it's a great idea. It's probably really good for somebody, though.
Pieter, I have een vraag voor jou. I speak a little bit English, but not so good. You have some aandelen in de vleesindustrie? Ik vind dat u het vlees eten wel een beetje overtrekt. Er zijn miljarden mensen in de wereld die nooit geen vlees eten en die ook niet omvallen. Als we nou de hele wapenindustrie afschaffen in de wereld, dan hoeft er niemand meer honger te lijden en hebben we allemaal goed te eten. Daar moeten we voor gaan. Oké, dankjewel.
Yeah, so I disagree. But to your point, I am not employed by the meat industry. I've taken no money from the meat industry. I probably should own shares in the meat industry given what I've paid, but it's a good deal, so I'm happy to pay it. And I've just given you lots of information that we can discuss, but it's pretty clear to me at least, and I apologize if I didn't make it clear, that we cannot have public health without animal source food in the diet. I may have spoken too much about meat and not enough about eggs, dairy, and seafood, but those are part of it as well.
Ik kom veel in contact met jonge mensen. Daar zijn er heel veel die vegetarisch zijn. Plus minus al 20% in Nederland. Ik denk dat het enkel maar toeneemt. Wat denkt u ervan?
I don't know the specific numbers. I know of many people who, after significant time as a vegetarian, realize that their health has decreased, and so they have to go to some omnivorous diet. And I think we need to be clear with the language. A vegetarian is an omnivore that does not eat meat. They could eat poultry, eggs, dairy, seafood. They're not going to eat red meat, no problem, fine. If you eat no animal source food, then that's a problem, but if you're an adult, carry on, as far as I'm concerned. But we have a problem with the language across this space, and people don't realize that even Hindus in India eat animal source food. They don't eat beef, but they have other animal source food in their diet. But people in the West look and say, oh, look at all the vegetarians. It's like, yes, but so as long as people are getting enough of the essential nutrition that they need, fine.
Good afternoon, Peter. Thank you for your research. I've got a question. I saw on your YouTube channel a nice video, and you talked about a plant-based diet. And you said, actually, we already have a plant-based diet. The whole politicians, they want us to transition to a more plant-based diet. But actually, your research shows that we actually are eating a plant-based diet.
Yes, the data came from FAO Stat, and if you look at the calories in our diet, and again there's a problem because we're comparing plant and animal, but the majority of humanity's protein and calories are coming from plants today.
And especially wheat.
Yes,
yeah.
Wheat is the single largest source of protein in humanity's diet. It's bigger than any other, so I said it's single largest, right? So it's 20% roughly is coming from wheat, and less than 40% of our protein is coming from all animal source foods combined. So it's more than half. And wheat is a really bad source, poor source. And the problem with wheat, again, is when we process the wheat, back to the point, we decrease its digestibility. So lysine is already limiting in wheat, but when we make bread or cereal out of it, it makes that lysine less digestible. Almost zero when we make breakfast cereal. Now think about where we usually put real milk on our cereal, and we get balanced protein. What happens when people switch to one of the plant juices? We don't know. We haven't looked at this with the sophistication that you in the swine industry have been looking at your rations for 40 plus years.
Okay, my last question. I've got several more, but it will be in another time. A lot of times when we talk to vegans, I'm an agricultural journalist, and there's a lot of responses from the vegans. They say, well, we are healthy, we don't need meat, and meat is, plants are healthier. What would you recommend our farmers, how they respond to these vegans that they say that they can have a healthy life without animal protein?
If we're engaged in a conversation with people, we're not antagonistic or adversarial. I, again, don't want to hammer anybody with information. I do, however, want to make clear that the nutrition we get from plants is less valuable than what we get from animals, so it's not comparable. And if somebody's going to replace animal source food with plant source foods, they need to eat much more. And so, for example, an 8-year-old boy physically cannot eat enough rice and lentils to meet his lysine requirements. Physically, just can't do it if he had unlimited access to it. So there's these fundamental differences. Plus, when we eat plant-sourced foods, plants are not benign. Plants don't love you any more than nature does. Plants often have chemicals that in part are to resist predation, diseases, insects, whatever, herbivory. And so those anti-quality components can interfere with our digestion and metabolism. So here's an example. Apparently oysters are a good source of zinc. Who knew? Okay, if you eat oysters, you can then track the serum level of zinc in a human subject, measure it in the blood. Feed that same amount of oysters, but with black beans. I don't know what that dish is, but if you feed them with beans, you get significantly less absorption of the zinc from the same amount of oysters. And if you go ahead and feed that same amount of oysters, but with corn tortillas, I don't know, tortillas translates? Corn chips. Then you get almost none of the zinc absorbed. And that gets to phytates, that gets to the anti-nutrients that are in plant source foods. So again, plants aren't, you know, the wholly healthful, benign substance. And for some people, it's remarkable what happens to them when they eliminate plant matter from their diet.
Thank you very much, Dr. Peter Ballerstedt. We zijn natuurlijk ook ontzettend trots en blij dat hij ook met wooden shoes naar huis gaat. Thank you very much for the very motivational speech.